Today I want to talk about a particular type of innovation that Massachusetts is actually showing the lead on, and it's innovation in tackling our biggest social problems. If you think about where we are right now, our social problems, our social challenges, whether it's helping troubled youth make successful transitions to adulthood, reducing obesity, reducing crime, helping low-income youngsters arrive at kindergarten ready to learn, these kinds of problems are as significant as ever. But we're at a point fiscally in this country where government support for any kind of new thinking in tackling social problems is going to be very hard to come by because we can barely afford to pay for what we're already spending money on. And if you think about what's coming down the road, as Washington starts cutting back and that starts trickling down to states, it's going to get worse and worse. So the question is, how do we keep innovating in tackling our biggest social challenges as a country at a time when there's not even the money to do what we're already doing? So I've been working on a pro bono basis with the state of Massachusetts, also the state of New York, trying to see if we can test a new way of financing government social services that goes under the name either of a pay-for-success contract or under the name of a social impact bond, and I'll explain in a moment what that is. And the basic objective here is to solve two different problems that we're facing. One is, today we spend a lot of money on social programs, and we almost never have any way to tell whether they're effective or not. We basically don't measure the outcomes of these programs. We typically spend money on the same things we spent money on last year and the same providers that we spent money on last year and increase their budget by 1 or 2% a year. We rarely reallocate because we have somehow evidence that one program is doing better than the other. So we have these programs that we spend a lot of money on, and we don't really know which ones are working, which aren't. When we do big evaluations of them, we rarely find spectacular results. So on the one hand, we have a fairly stagnant way of financing social programs. And then on the other hand, we have lots of innovative nonprofits, for-profit social service providers out there in the community developing solutions. And there's really no path right now where if, say, a foundation finances an innovative nonprofit to do something and it seems like it's succeeding, there's no systematic path through which the government picks that up and scales it up. I mean, sometimes governments do, sometimes they don't. More often they don't. More generally, governments basically don't invest in prevention. You know, we get into all these situations with tight budgets where if we could spend money up front, we'd save money 4 or 5 years from now on remedial expenditures, but that's a very hard thing for governments to get themselves to do. And so the question is there some other way of financing government social programs, and particularly of partnering with the nonprofit innovators that could accelerate our pace of social innovation? So here is the idea that is being tested in a single place right now in the United Kingdom, and which Massachusetts is on the way to testing as well here. So let me describe what's going on in the UK to be very concrete, and then I'll be a little more abstract and explain the concept in more detail. So what's happening in the UK in the UK, there's a prison in Peterborough, England, where on average about 60% of the people who come out of this prison reoffend within a couple of years and get put back in prison. And there's a nonprofit there that thinks that it has some programming it could give to prisoners that would reduce that rate significantly. Now, when I was in the Obama administration at OMB, people would come to me every day saying, I have some wonderful program, and if you would just invest in it, I promise that it works and it'll save you money down the road. And there wasn't always a lot of evidence, and you know, I would say prove it, and then the conversation would end there. What's happened here in the UK is this nonprofit came to the UK government and said, here's the deal, only pay us if we succeed in reducing recidivism. Okay? So we want a performance-based contract that says we're going to deliver services for a couple of years. Then you're going to measure the recidivism outcome, and if we succeed in hitting the objective, then you pay us our costs plus a little extra. Okay? Now, if you think about this, well, that's sort of promising. It's a money-back guarantee for the taxpayers, pretty good from the government perspective. But if you're the nonprofit, there's some problems with this payment arrangement. First of all, what nonprofit has 2 or 3 years worth of funding, operating capital sitting around to go deliver services and get paid maybe in year 4 after we've measured and figured out whether you actually met the performance target? Secondly, that's a lot of risk. I mean, what if you don't hit the performance target? You're going to be bankrupt as an organization. That's not very responsible to the people you're serving. So what's happening in this mechanism in the UK, and is going to happen in what we're setting up here in Massachusetts, is private investors come in. They provide the operating capital for the nonprofits, and they absorb most of the risk. So what actually happens is not that the nonprofit doesn't get paid back if it fails, it's that the investors don't get paid back if they fail. And if you can put up the slide, that's one more, please. Maybe I have to do it. Let's see. Okay. Here's how this basically works. Start at the top right. You have some private funders who come up with the capital. There's an intermediary that tends to organize this whole thing, that raises the money from the investors and lines up the team of people to deliver the services, because in many of these projects, you need more than one service provider. You need a team of service providers, say one team that's really good with working with the prisoners in the prison, another team that's good at finding jobs when they get out, another team that works with the families on the outside. So the intermediary raises money from the private funders. It gives the money it raises as the working capital to the service providers. The service providers do their thing. They hopefully produce good social outcomes and also budget savings because of the reduced need for remedial expenditure that comes to the government. And if the pre-arranged performance targets are met, then the government pays the intermediary, and the private funders get their principal and their return on their investment back. So note how this differs from how we currently finance social services. First of all, the government can take a risk on something that may or may not work, because the taxpayers only pay if the thing succeeds. Secondly, the service providers actually get a multi-year contract and operating capital. Anyone who knows anybody in the nonprofit community knows that you're always begging for next month, next year's operating funds. It's very hard to expand because you can't plan ahead. But this sets up a multi-year mechanism, a multi-year contract with the government, so that you can expand your operations in a predictable way, and it sets the path that if you are successful and you can prove that you're delivering value, that you can perhaps expand further, go statewide, go expand to another state, whatever. Another thing this does is it delivers learning about whether the thing actually works. Because payment depends on the performance metrics, it causes us to measure in real time what's actually happening in a rigorous way. And for example, in the UK setup, the performance is being measured by how what happens in the recidivism in the prison that's delivering the services relative to a control group of a bunch of other prisons that aren't getting these services. So unlike how we normally evaluate our government programs, which is to do like a 7-year randomized evaluation where what you find out at the end is whether something worked 7 years ago, this builds an ongoing real-time assessment of how the programs are working. And it really creates an opportunity to invest in prevention, which again is so hard for government to do. So that's the basic mechanism. And as I said, there's one of these in the world, in the UK. And Massachusetts is on the way to setting up 2 of these. So the Patrick administration, Governor Patrick and Budget Director Jay Gonzalez, have started down the path of trying to do 2 of these in Massachusetts. One is going to serve youth who are aging out of the juvenile justice system. So in Massachusetts today, when youth typically hit age 18, they're no longer under the state care from the juvenile justice system, and we don't have very systematic services for people after they hit their 18th birthday. They go from getting a lot of services to getting very little, and the question is, could one organize a more coordinated effort to make sure these young people make a successful transition to adulthood, and by doing so, reduce their rate of future criminal offenses and save the state money on incarceration costs. So that's one project the state is setting up. The second is around chronically homeless individuals. Chronically homeless individuals end up being very high users of healthcare services. They end up going to the emergency rooms several times a year. If you can actually stabilize someone's housing situation, give them support in that housing, it looks like you can save quite a lot of money on the Medicaid budget. At the same time, you're making the people being served much better off. And so that's a second project the state here in Massachusetts is working on to try to use this kind of financing mechanism to be able to continue to innovate in sort of doing preventive spending in social services at a time when the budget is very tight. What's sort of interesting about this overall idea I had never heard of it 2 years ago, and it's now consuming my life, is that it's spreading very rapidly, and many of the people who are involved in this are based in Massachusetts. So you see this box of an intermediary there. The two main organizations that have formed to offer intermediary services to governments that are thinking about doing this around the country, one called Social Finance, another called Third Sector Capital, both are based in Massachusetts. And so it's not just that our government is being innovative and our nonprofits in working with our state government in trying to do this. Massachusetts is actually poised to play a very big role more broadly as this idea spreads beyond what's going on here in Massachusetts. So as I said, this is also the state of New York is starting to do this. New York City has actually set up one of these projects to serve youth offenders at Rikers Island. The president put money in his budget to encourage states to test this kind of approach. So this is an idea that is spreading quite rapidly, but it's very much an experimental idea. There are a number of things that may turn out not to work here. Among the things that might not work are, will at the end of the day these projects offer a return risk trade-off that looks appealing to investors. And I described earlier how many of our social programs, when they've been evaluated, have not had spectacular results. This whole mechanism hinges on it actually being possible to make significantly move the dial on these issues in a way that we haven't, or at least we haven't rigorously been able to show in the past. And so these are risky investments for the investors. It's looking like the initial investors are likely to be, at least in part, philanthropically minded investors. Foundations that say, under my current way of funding things, I put money out the door, I fund an organization, and I rarely actually know what we got from it. And even if it does work, I don't have any ready way to get the government to cooperate and scale up whatever it is I started. This looks pretty appealing to a philanthropy that says, hey, if I invested in an innovative social service organization this way, I'll know whether it worked, and I'll be in a relationship with the government so that if it works, it grows. And so I think there are going to be philanthropies that are going to think that this is at least a way worth testing, and that might turn out to be a better way, in some cases, for making investments in innovative nonprofits. But if this idea is really going to go to scale, if this is going to end up going on in 30 states with 6 or 10 projects each, this is going to end up needing certainly hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars of capital to make it happen, and that's only going to happen if commercial capital comes into the mix. And so what's going to be interesting is to see how one makes the transition as these go from being risky projects that probably need some kind of socially minded investor to be involved towards something that's commercially viable. Can we make that transition as we show that some of these things really do work, and it's not just 50-50 whether they work, they start having 80 or 90% chance of working, and then you can make these into investment propositions that hopefully can attract private capital. But this transition period, I think, is going to be very interesting. And in the New York City deal, what happened is Goldman Sachs put up the $10 million to finance the program, but the Bloomberg Foundation backstopped it so that they wouldn't lose, so that Goldman Sachs can't lose more than $2 million out of that. And so there's sort of this hybrid approach going on in the initial projects. The other thing I just want to emphasize is this is not a tool that fits. This is not how we should fund everything in the social sector. This is a good tool when we see a preventive investment that we're under-investing in right now, and that somehow we can't seem to make the far-sighted decision to invest in it in a more direct way. This only works if we can measure well what it is that society actually cares about the service delivery. If you get to a situation where there isn't a good way to measure the benefits of the social services. You can only measure a small aspect of it. This could be a very dangerous tool because it could lead to teaching, the equivalent of teaching toward the test, where service provision really focuses on that thing that can be measured, and you don't actually get the holistic result that you care about. So there are a number of criteria that have to hold for this to work, and I think it's certainly a relative minority of social service things that this would be a good fit for. On the other hand, if we were to make significant progress over the next few years on reducing homelessness or helping our youth coming out of the juvenile justice system or any of these things, those would be amazing accomplishments. And so, even if it only ends up being 20% of social service innovation that this is a good fit for, it's still, I think, certainly something worth testing. So I think I'm going to wrap up there and hear what people are tweeting about this. Thank you.
Jeffrey Liebman, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Jeffrey, you get our attention right off the bat. We can barely afford to pay for what we're already doing, and it's going to get worse. I think we can all see that coming. I mean, I don't know about anybody else here, but I have the very clear sense that we are going to have to get up our duffs in this country and see the world honestly. Hey, hang on a second, Jeffrey, I got a question for you. See the world afresh and honestly and actually really maybe radically do things differently. For me, that actually seems exciting and welcome and about high time. We can't just be doing the old things again and again. You say that you're going to have risk and return in these social programs, and we've got tweeters asking the payout that you're describing. Is it literally in the success of the social programs? Or when you talk about commercial money coming into this arena, is it actually a cash payout somehow for success achieved in social programs?
That's a great question. So here's how it works. You set some metric which says, for example, in the UK, the government doesn't pay anything unless you reduce recidivism by at least 7%. And then as you reduce it beyond 7% and the government saves more money on incarceration, the investors get paid back more up to some cap. And so there's sort of be a sliding scale. And the idea would be that the government would pay an amount equivalent to some combination of its actual budget savings and maybe some social value above that. But at the end of the day, if it works, this is the government paying for it. And it has to clearly pay enough to cover the cost of the services, plus a little extra in terms of a rate of return for the investors.
Enough extra that it might actually draw commercial investment?
That's the idea here. But I think that's the challenge, because I don't think, if you look at the UK example, the returns were something like 12%. 12% is not the kind of return you'd take for something that's as risky as this. And so
I don't know, 12% in this hall right now. 12% sure beats my.
Yeah, but you got to understand that the principle is all at risk. But if they fail, they lose their whole investment. It's one thing to say you're going to get 12% on an investment where you get your principal back.
So you're going to see investors out on the streets, like personally carrying homeless people to.
And the idea is to do what works.
Come on, learn. Who's more likely to implement this, free market Romney or your guy, President incumbent Obama?
Well, I mean, clearly the president has been making big investments in social innovation. He put funding for this in his budget, but I don't think this is a partisan issue. I mean, getting better results on social services, that's not a Democrat or Republican issue. And actually, if you look at the UK, when they developed their program, it was developed under the outgoing Labour government, but then announced with fanfare by the new Conservative government. And so you can see that this is something that, this is just common sense. We got to find a way to do better with less, and this is one possible tool that might help.
It's not partisan, but we'll make it partisan in about 50 seconds. So, Jeffrey Liebman, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.